What if the real story behind the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Los Angeles Clippers right now isn't about who won the latest game, but about which franchise is quietly heading toward a strategic crossroads that could reshape the Western Conference? Because if you only looked at the scoreboard, you'd think this matchup was simple. The Clippers exploded offensively, dropping 153 points on Minnesota behind a monstrous 45-point performance from Kawhi Leonard, blowing the doors off the Wolves in a 153-128 offensive avalanche. But that scoreline hides a deeper truth about both teams, one that fans, front offices, and maybe even players themselves are starting to recognize. Let's start with the obvious question: who actually controlled this game? On paper, the Clippers did, but tactically the story is more complicated because Minnesota didn't just lose a game, they lost the battle for identity. This Timberwolves roster was built to dominate defensively. Anthony Edwards is supposed to be the superstar engine. Rudy Gobert anchors the paint, Julius Randle provides scoring balance, Jaden McDaniels gives them perimeter defense. It's a roster designed to grind opponents down, and yet the Clippers just hung 153 points on them. That is not just a bad defensive night, that is a structural breakdown. Now pause for a second and think about what that means. If your entire franchise identity is defense and a team drops 153 on you, what exactly are you? Anthony Edwards did what stars do. He attacked, scored, tried to push tempo, but when the Clippers offense started rolling, Minnesota's defensive communication collapsed. Rotations were slow, closeouts were lazy, the help defense that usually defines the Wolves disappeared. This is where coaching comes into focus. Chris Finch has built a strong system in Minnesota, but tonight exposed one of the system's weaknesses: adaptability. When the Clippers went into rapid ball movement mode, Minnesota kept playing the same drop coverage with Gobert, and that's exactly what the Clippers wanted. Ty Lue knew it. He attacked it relentlessly. James Harden initiated high pick and rolls. Kawhi Leonard hunted mismatches. Ivica Zubac punished the interior. And the moment Minnesota overhelped, shooters were waiting. That's not luck. That's scouting. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because the Clippers' offensive explosion didn't just expose Minnesota's defense. It also revealed a subtle shift happening inside the Clippers' locker room. For months, critics have said this Clippers roster was aging, expensive, and fragile. Kawhi Leonard's injury history, Harden's reputation for playoff inconsistency, the massive payroll. The narrative was that this team's window had already closed. But suddenly they've climbed back above .500 after once being buried deep below it earlier in the season. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a locker room starts believing again. Kawhi Leonard's 45-point explosion wasn't just a hot night. It was a statement, the kind of performance that tells teammates we still have a ceiling. But that leads to the next uncomfortable question. Can the Clippers actually sustain this? Because the roster math is brutal. Bradley Beal is already out for the season. Darius Garland has been dealing with injury issues since arriving in a trade. And the Clippers' payroll situation is one of the most expensive in the league. That means every win matters, not just competitively, but financially. If this team doesn't make a deep playoff run, the front office faces some brutal decisions. Extensions, luxury tax penalties, aging stars. The cost of maintaining this roster could become unsustainable. Which brings us back to Minnesota, because the Wolves are facing a different kind of pressure. Anthony Edwards is becoming one of the NBA's brightest stars. His scoring averages are climbing, his confidence is undeniable, and he's quickly becoming the face of the franchise. But superstardom comes with expectations. And right now, the biggest question surrounding Minnesota isn't talent, it's hierarchy. Who actually runs this team in crunch time? Edwards wants the ball. Randle wants touches. Gobert demands defensive schemes built around him. McDaniels thrives when the offense flows. That's 4 different identities inside one roster. When things are working, it's balanced. When things go wrong, it becomes confusion. And tonight you saw flashes of that confusion. Late rotations, offensive stagnation, players looking to the bench for answers. This is the part mainstream broadcasts rarely talk about: locker room psychology. Because great teams don't just have talent, they have clarity. Look at the Clippers. When the offense ran through Kawhi, everyone knew their role. Harden facilitated, Zubac controlled the boards, shooters spaced the floor. Clarity. Minnesota didn't have that tonight. Now let's talk about the biggest tactical weakness exposed in this matchup: transition defense. The Clippers repeatedly punished Minnesota by pushing tempo after rebounds. Harden initiated early offense before Gobert could set the defensive structure. That forced Minnesota into scrambling rotations, and scrambling defense leads to open threes, which leads to games like this. But here's the twist. Despite the blowout score, Minnesota still has one advantage the Clippers can't replicate: youth. Edwards is still ascending. McDaniels is entering his prime. Naz Reid continues developing as a versatile scorer. The Wolves have time, the Clippers don't. Kawhi Leonard is in his 30s. Harden's style requires heavy usage, and the Western Conference isn't getting easier. Denver is still elite. Oklahoma City is rising. Dallas has Luka. Phoenix isn't going anywhere. Every season that passes tightens the championship window for Los Angeles. So when you see a game like this, 153 points, Kawhi dominating, Clippers looking unstoppable, you have to ask a bigger question. Is this a preview of their playoff form, or the final peak before the roster inevitably breaks apart? Because history tells us something important about teams built like the Clippers. They burn bright, but rarely for long. Now let's break down the projected starting lineups when these teams are fully healthy. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, the likely starting five is Anthony Edwards at shooting guard, Mike Conley at point guard, Jaden McDaniels at small forward, Julius Randle at power forward, and Rudy Gobert at center. That lineup emphasizes defense and interior control. For the Los Angeles Clippers, the expected starting group features James Harden at point guard, Norman Powell at shooting guard, Kawhi Leonard at small forward, John Collins at power forward, and Ivica Zubac at center. That lineup emphasizes spacing and isolation scoring. Now look at those two lineups and you immediately see the philosophical clash. Minnesota wants to slow the game down. The Clippers want chaos, and tonight chaos won. But here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. The Timberwolves might actually need to change their roster construction if they want to become true title contenders. Gobert's defensive presence is elite, but it limits spacing. Randle's scoring is valuable, but it sometimes overlaps with Edwards' role. Minnesota still hasn't found the perfect offensive identity around their superstar. Meanwhile, the Clippers have the opposite problem. Their offense is terrifying, but their defense can collapse when Kawhi isn't fully engaged. So both teams have weaknesses. The difference is timing. Minnesota's timeline is just beginning. The Clippers' timeline might be closing, and that's why this matchup matters far beyond one regular season game. Because when the playoffs arrive, one of these franchises will be trying to prove they belong in the championship conversation, while the other might be fighting to prove its championship window hasn't already closed. Here's the bold prediction. The Timberwolves will finish with a better long-term future in the Western Conference, but the Clippers, if Kawhi Leonard stays healthy, are still the more dangerous team right now. And if these two teams meet in a playoff series this year, the uncomfortable truth Minnesota fans might have to accept is this: